Alrighty, welcome to the final monthly recap of 2024. This is for December 2024. Hope you all had a wonderful, wonderful month, wonderful holidays. Appreciate you all. So let's get into it. So happy Kwanzaa, happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, all the holidays. It's December for you. So this month, I'm not going to say it because you know I'm going to say it. Fine, I'll say it. Was crazy busy. All right, so the Fed had a meeting. They cut rates by 0.25%, but their expectations, their projections going forward, completely different. Okay, going to spend a lot of time on that. Lots to get into over there. Inflation is heating up. I'll tell you why we shouldn't be concerned. Okay, and then latest jobs numbers, and I'm going to point to a couple recent trends that might be a little bit worrisome on the jobs front. Mortgage rates, sales forecast, going to be looking at that as well. So stay tuned at the very end for that. And then mortgage rates sold, they went up from about 6.875 to about 7%. As a first-time home buyer making less than 120% of the area median income, kind of the ideal scenario, and that's with 0 points. So let's get into it. So the Fed had their final meeting. Each of these meetings with an asterisk is a meeting with a summary of economic projections, which is the longer, more in-depth meetings where they don't just tell you what happened with the Fed funds rate, but they actually just show their work. Okay, so we wrapped up the last meeting. It happened to be a meeting associated with a summary of economic projections. It was almost unanimous when the Fed cut rates by 0.25%. Almost. There was one dissenter. And it's actually really, really interesting because at the very beginning of the meeting, there was like 4 dissenters. But by the very end, when they got to the vote, there was only one. I'll show you what I'm talking about in just a second here. The Fed did lower their expectations for Fed rate cuts in 2025 drastically. Drastically. They were originally expecting, last time when they met in September and they were projecting rates in 2025, between 1 and 1.25%. So I call it 1 and an eighth, okay, worth of rate cuts in 2025. They slashed that when they had their meeting in December down to 0.5%. So basically cut it in half, okay? We're going to be looking at why they made that decision, and I'll tell you also why that's probably not going to be the case, okay? Fed did increase their GDP projections for 2024. In September, they were thinking closer to 2%. Now they're thinking 2.5% by the end of the year. They also increased their expectations for next year from 2% to 2.1%. So the Fed as a whole is feeling better about gross domestic product. They are feeling better about the economy as a whole. They are also feeling better about unemployment. Okay, they feel really good about unemployment. They lowered their projections for 2024. Originally, back in September, they were thinking 4.4%. They lowered that to 4.2%. 2025, they also lowered it from 4.4 to 4.3. So generally speaking, just feel better about the economy, better about the employment market. Okay. One arena where they did not feel better was inflation. Okay. The Fed increased their inflation projections for core personal consumption expenditures. That's PCE, personal consumption expenditures. That's the Fed's favorite measure of inflation. Okay, so core is with volatile food and energy removed. We don't have to be at the mercy of gasoline prices or oil. Also, we don't want to be at the concern of eggs and eggflation and all of that, cost of chicken, whatever the case may be. So with those volatile food and energy components removed, what is the core rate of personal consumption expenditures? The Fed wants that rate to get all the way down to 2%. Okay, but they changed their tune a little bit. They said, hey, look, we think by the end of 2024 it's going to go from 2.6 to 2.8%. So they increased their expectations for inflation. They also increased it in 2025. Hey, we no longer think we're going to be at 2.2% by the end of the year. We think we're going to be closer to 2.5%. Okay, so Fed feels more optimistic about GDP, more optimistic about jobs, and more pessimistic, less optimistic about inflation as a whole. The Fed also changed their tune. They're no longer expecting the Fed's target rate for core PCE, that 2% target. They're not expecting to hit that now until 2027. They originally thought that 2025. Now they're thinking 2026. And then they finally, in December, they came out and said, we think it's going to be 2027. So they keep moving out that goalpost. Now, here's kind of the craziness, right? This is the Fed funds rate projection. So whenever the Fed has these meetings, a summary of economic projections, they don't just, again, say what they think the rate's going to be. They actually have to come out and tell people by putting pen to paper and showing, here's where we think it's going to be going forward. Okay, so each one of these blue little dots is one Fed member. Over here is the September dot plot, which is what this is called. And then this is the December dot plot. So here's where I kind of got a good chuckle out of it. 2024, right? So right now, today, this is ending today. Majority thought rates are going to be in this 4.75 to 4.5% range. I'm sorry, 4.25 to 4.5% range, which is where the Fed funds rate is currently at. Okay. But at the very beginning of the meeting, there was 4 people thinking there should be no rate cut. By the end of the meeting, when they took that vote, there was only 1 dissenter, but there's 4 dots here. So started off with 4 dissenters, got whittled down to 1 dissenter when push came to shove and the vote actually happened. I think that's kind of interesting. But then looking forward, okay, as you can see, the majority opinion now is by the end of 2025, rates to be in this 4 to 3.75 range. They always do a range. Well, back in September, they were thinking that rate was going to be between like 3.5% and 3%. So significantly lower than what they're now thinking. Things can change very quickly. Okay. And that's kind of the moral of the story. Between September and December, the opinions changed drastically. What didn't change really was their longer term projections. Those are almost identical. Okay. So they still want to get there. It's just a question of how quickly are they going to get there. The Fed thinks because of the strength of the economy, because of the strength of the jobs market, they're not going to cut rates quite as aggressively as they were originally thinking. They also pointed to inflation as being a reason why. Inflation heating up, yeah, it's going to give us a little bit of concern. We talk about a couple of reasons to think, hey, maybe the jobs market's not as strong as we all think, and hey, maybe inflation's not as bad as we all think either. Okay, so if Aaron started off sour, he's going to end sweet. So here's the Fed meeting schedule for 2025. Again, bold and asterisk means a summary of economic projections. We get those dot plots. Everything else is going to be like a kind of a lesser meeting where they still could cut rates, but they're not going to release as much commentary and show their work as much. Okay. So another meeting in about a month, end of January. Stay tuned on that. Let's talk about inflation. Okay. The Fed certainly want to talk about inflation. I'm more than happy to talk about inflation. So yes, the numbers weren't so good this month. Okay. Producer price index. So wholesale inflation as businesses feel it. The headline increased from 2.6 to 3%. The core rate increased from 3.1 to 3.4. Again, core rate is always just going to be food and energy removed from that equation. Consumer price index, inflation as us, consumers feel it. Headline increased from 2.6 to 2.7. The core was actually unchanged at 3.3%. Fed wants this rate to get all the way down to 2. The Fed also wants core PCE to get all the way down to 2. Personal consumption expenditures, it increased from 2.3 to 2.4. Core actually remained at 2.8. That's actually really good news. Okay, really good news. Everybody was thinking these personal consumption expenditure rates were going to come in significantly higher. Okay, a lot of expectations were for 2.5, 2.6% on the headline. So it's actually a pretty solid report. We actually got some pretty good news on this. Now, here's why, yes, the Fed's concerned about it, but I'm not as concerned. Okay, when we look at numbers that are being replaced, we saw a number of very calm numbers from a year ago. October's figure was really low. November, December was all very low. Okay. Well, whenever you look at year-over-year numbers, yes, today's numbers matter, but so do the numbers from a year ago. So even if inflation stays stagnant, if you're replacing a really cool number, even a negative number, it can still show an increase. Okay. One number drops off, one number gets added. These numbers from a year ago that were getting replaced were really cool numbers. So of course it looks like it's going to get worse before it gets better. That's not out of the ordinary at all. In addition, the shelter components are a significant component of inflation. Okay. And this is still not caught up. We finally saw a little bit of catch up in this latest PCE report. There's good reason to think we're going to be replacing some warmer numbers, and that's going to continue to come down and help out the inflation figure. So Fed's really worried about inflation. I'm not really worried about inflation. Only because we knew this was going to happen. We knew we were going to be replacing some cool numbers, and we knew it was going to get worse before it gets better. So as far as I'm concerned, so far, yes, things are on track. I think we should start to see some progress. January's number was warm. February's number was kind of middling, but March was kind of warm as well. April's was a little bit warmer as well. So we're going to be replacing some warmer figures coming up here, and that should help inflation come down. So don't stress. We knew it was going to get worse before it gets better. As inflation comes down, mortgage rates come down. So you and I both want it to come down. There's reason to think that's going to happen. So that's why inflation isn't as bad as the Fed thinks it's going to be. Okay, let's talk about jobs and why jobs are not as strong as the government thinks they're going to be. So let's get into it. So unemployment rate had a crazy year, right? I mean, increased from 4.1 to 4.3, down to 4.2, down to 4.1, stayed at 4.1, up to 4.2. It's all over the freaking map here, right? And BLS had a crazy, terrible number last month, well, in November, it was actually a pretty strong report. And like that's why the government's saying, look, we feel really good about the economy. We feel really good about jobs. But there's some trends that are developing that are a little bit concerning. So CoreSite is a website. They came out with a report that showed that notable store closings in 2024, they're up 70% from last year. Okay. So retail store closings are up 70% from last year. Like that's a huge change, right? And another trend that's developed, when you look at how long people are staying unemployed once they're unemployed, that has increased 21% over the last 7 months. So this is the median weeks of unemployment. That's increased 21% over the last 7 months. So people that are unemployed, it's taking them longer to find jobs. In addition, you look at all these store closings, I mean, 1,200 Walgreens, 900 CVS, 850 Party City stores. Like these are huge numbers. And these are a lot of people that are going on unemployment. And when they go on unemployment, they're staying unemployed for longer. So is the jobs market really as strong as the government would have us believe? BLS is also known for having drastic revisions. You could talk to them themselves and they'd be like, yeah, 2024 was not our best year. They kept missing the boat, having significant revisions. Sometimes they were missing the boat by as much as 35%. Pretty drastic, margins of error. I don't know that any of us would be given that much margin, but I'm being a little mean. BLS does have a tough job, right? How do you calculate how many jobs are gained or lost in the entire country? It's not easy, right? So there's a lot of modeling. There's a lot of issues that they come across, reporting errors and all sorts of stuff. But I mean, there's no way around it. BLS's numbers have been wildly erratic and missing the boat significantly. So, all right, let's talk about forecast for 2025. So here's where Realtor.com, National Association of Realtors, MBS Highway, they measure, and it's a lot where I get a lot of my information from, mortgage-backed securities market, which is what rates are based on. Okay, so the range for rates for these few sources range from 5.75 to 6.2. They are all thinking that there's going to be more home sales in the US, as well as home prices are also going to be increasing year over year. It's for the entire nation, not just like Colorado specific, but the entire nation. What's interesting to me here is that those that are more optimistic about rates, NAR thinks its mortgage rate's going to get to 6%. They're expecting a 10% increase in existing home sales. Existing home sales means resale transactions, non-new construction. Okay. MBS Highway is a little bit more optimistic on rates. They're also more optimistic about existing home sales. Realtor.com, less optimistic about rates, less optimistic about home sales. It's tied to one another, right? As rates come down, all of a sudden that log jam of 2.5 years of pent up demand can get released and people can start re-entering the market. But they all have really low rates. So why would they want to lose their 3% rate and go get 7%? So if rates come down more, you'll see more people entering the market. A lot of people are wearing what we call those golden handcuffs where they're kind of trapped by their low rates. Also, the people that are most optimistic about the interest rates are also more optimistic about home prices, because the more buyers you have in the market, the more transactions that are occurring, it drives up demand, it eats into that limited supply, and all of a sudden home prices start to increase, just like we saw during COVID, right? So take these also with a grain of salt, right? They're never going to be spot on. These are all what they think the rates are going to be at the very end of 2025. So a full year from now, where do they think rates are going to be at? We're probably going to see points better than this and points worse than this all throughout the year. Even progress never goes in one straight line. So, all right, looking ahead to 2025, what else do we got out there? Again, the Fed changed their expectations drastically. What actually ends up happening? I bet we're going to see more than 0.5% of rate cuts in 2025. I think we're going to see some stinker jobs reports. I think inflation is going to start to come down. And I think we're going to see more than, 2 cuts in all of 2025. I just don't see that happening. But we'll see. Time will tell. Can the Fed really pull off a soft landing? So soft landing, again, is how do you have elevated rates, cut rates, and do so in a way that does not cause a recession? That's basically the whole Fed's challenge. Can the Fed really pull off a soft landing? It depends. Are jobs and the economy as strong as the Fed thinks they are? If the answer is yes, yeah, it's entirely possible. Maybe they do have that soft landing. If the answer is no, then we could possibly slip into a potential recession, which is just 2 consecutive quarters of 0 or negative GDP. So we shall see. Right now, the Fed's feeling really good. I know none of us want a recession, so we are hopeful that they are right. Inflation. Does the new administration do what they said with tariffs? Okay. The new administration came out and said, look, we want to impose 25% tariffs on Canada and Mexico on day one. We also want to slap on an additional 10% tariff on China. Well, are they using that as a bargaining chip to eventually get what they want? Or are we actually going to see that happen? That would be inflationary. If tariffs are enacted, it would be inflationary in nature. Inflation is bad news for mortgage rates. Okay, so we shall see. The Treasury Secretary is a very moderate pick. Everybody's kind of cautiously optimistic that he's more of the type of person that's not going to, force tariffs and force, some significant economic, downslide. Hopefully, he's the kind of guy that's just going to use that as a bargaining chip to get what he ultimately wants. So we shall see. Going to be very interesting. Definitely going to be some drama. Mortgage rates, as you saw on the previous slide, there's 2.5 years of pent up demand now. We all thought rates were going to be elevated for 6 months and then a year. Okay, maybe a year and a half. Well, we're 2.5 years in now of elevated rates. If there's even a slight reprieve from mortgage rates, it's going to help significantly with housing. There's so much pent up demand. All we need is a little bit of relief on the mortgage rate front, and people are going to start to enter the market again. So, and then, like I said, are the recent trend breaking figures here to stay? The trend breaking figures, the latest jobs reports are really good. Are those here to stay, or are some of the underlying concerns I had going to be realized in the actual jobs reports going forward? We shall see there too. And then surprise, right? There's all of these projections are worth nothing because there's always going to be a surprise. It could be, we've seen so many between COVID-19, Ukraine, Middle East. I mean, it's just one thing after another. So there's always going to be some surprise that shakes the markets that nobody was really anticipating. What does 2025 have in store? I have no idea. But I'm going to be here to find out with you all. So thank you all so much. Thank you for a wonderful year. Thank you for all the referrals. It literally means the world to me and my team. It keeps us working. It keeps us doing what we love to do, which is serving people. So thank you all so much for that. And then have a wonderful, wonderful new year. I appreciate you so much, and I'll see you in 2025. Thank you. Bye.